ドクター。
Hello and welcome to Doctor's Guide to Team Building. In this video, we'll be going over both the basics and the more complex topics such as good early game units and the various traps and pitfalls that a player might fall into when team building. We'll also discuss some operators that will be useful additions to the team early on, as well as those who continue to be useful in later stages of the game. Before we begin, let's go over some of the terms that will be used throughout the video. Deployment points. This is the resource used to determine whether or not you can deploy an operator. Block count. This is the amount of enemies that a certain operator will be able to stop. Any more than that, and enemies will pass by them. Elite. This is essentially limit breaking, resetting the operator's level while keeping their stats and, at the same time, giving them new abilities or talents. When talking about elites, we will use the term E1 to refer to their first promotion and E2 for their second promotion. To start off, we will assume that we have at least completed chapter 0 of the story or rolled on the gacha. Either of these two actions will provide us with the operators necessary to form a team. But before we begin, and speaking mostly to the players who tend to spend money on the game, a comment about using your shiny high rarity operators. Sure, it's tempting to deploy all of your high star operators, but don't fall for this trap. During early game, you're usually strapped for deploy points, and since higher rarity operators cost more to deploy, adding too many of them creates a snowball effect which unnecessarily hinders the effectiveness of your deployment speed. At the very least, have half of the team be 4-star or lower rarity operators. You can change operators as your units get stronger and you get more familiar with the setups. That said, let's actually start talking about team building. We will begin by setting up our core composition. The operators included within this selection will be the backbone of our team and will be more than likely used 90% of the time. What we want for this core is a vanguard, one anti-air sniper, one caster, one defender, and 2 medics. The basic idea is this. First, we need someone cheap and reliable to hold the front line at the start of the map until we can get things settled. Even better if they can provide us extra deploy points. These are exactly the traits of vanguards. They have the lowest cost out of all operators and have skills that provide an extra income of points. Second, in many stages, there are drones that need to be taken care of, and they can't be blocked. In most situations, your operators will prioritize the enemy that is closest to the escape point, and let those unblockable drones pass. With that in mind, we need an operator that will prioritize attacking the drones to prevent that from happening. This is where the anti-air sniper comes into play. We can check for the correct trait by selecting the operator's information page and looking at the bottom right of the screen. As a bonus, these operators cost relatively low deployment points and still deal decent damage. Third, there are enemies with high defense stats, and this usually means that physical damage dealers will deal little to no damage to them. Instead of chipping away, we can choose to use magic attacks, which completely ignore defense, and are only influenced by magic resistance. Although supports and a few select guards have magic capabilities, casters are our main source of magical damage. As such, it is always a good idea to have at least one of them in our composition. Fourth, we need an operator that is tanky. Our defenders have the ability to block a large number of enemies and boast high defense and health stats for survivability. Something important to take note of when selecting our defender is that there are some defenders that have healing skills instead of defense buffs. These defenders can only block 2 enemies at a time, as opposed to the normal 3 before their promotion to E1. Even though the difference between 2 and 3 blocks might not seem that huge in theory, it actually is quite big when playing the stages in practice. The reason for this is the wave design. Enemies sometimes come in pairs, in clusters, or even as a whole pack. Small differences like this will decide whether or not you hold the line. Finally, the 2 medics are fairly straightforward. Enemies retaliate and operators will take damage. We will need healers to sustain the defense. It's suggested to have a single target as well as a multi-target healer. Single target for healing high focus damage on a single operator, and multi-target for healing a more decentralized damage situation. By now we've finished setting up half the team. Let's complete it by filling out the remaining half. For the purpose of simplicity, we will first go over a basic setup template that allows our team to be generally balanced and able to deal with most situations that it faces. Then, we'll introduce some of the more advanced setups that can be used and the thought process behind forming them. The basic setup is essentially an extension of our core, where we take almost every class and add them all over again. The difference is, instead of having 4 medics, we keep the original 2 and add 2 guards. And instead of having 2 defenders, we keep the original and allow that last slot to be a flexible choice. In this team composition, our second sniper doesn't have to be anti-air. We can choose to have a different type of sniper, like an AoE sniper, Shirayuki for example. The same goes for the caster slot. If we chose for an AoE caster before, we can opt for a single target one, like Amiya. For the guard slots, it is highly recommended to have a duelist. These are easily found by checking their trait description, which should specify that they can only block 1 enemy at a time. The other is a free pick. Just pick your favorite. In the end, we should have 2 vanguards, 2 snipers, 2 casters, 2 medics, 2 guards, 1 defender, and an operator of your own choice. Of course, this is just a template for us to use. You should adapt your team to what the situation calls for. Here's an example and thought process of forming a team composition for a specific situation. This is a map where there is only 1 exit and a huge flow of enemies. Single target operators might not kill them all in time, which means we will want a large amount of AoE operators, along with an extra defender to hold the enemies in place. For this, we need to form a team that involves gathering all the enemies into 1 concentrated location and weaving in a kill zone. We build a team that has 3 AoE operators and 2 defenders as the core. The defenders gather all the enemies, and the AoE operators defeat them all in 1 fell swoop. Consider also that defenders and AoE operators are rather costly, taking as much as 30 deploy points, and may take too long to deploy if you don't have a sufficient income of deployment points. To balance this out, we will need to take an extra vanguard with us, and to complete this team, we still bring along our anti-air sniper and duelist to deal with drones or stray single enemies. You may have noticed the absence of the support and specialist classes in these teams. This is mainly because these 2 types of classes, like their names imply, or specialize in some aspects like having greatly decreased redeploy time, or pushing and pulling enemies off ledges. That doesn't mean that supports can't deal damage, or that specialists can't be used as guards. It just requires knowledge about specific operators within these categories. The takeaway should be that as you get more familiar with the game and its operators, you can further diversify your teams with specialists and supports to match your playstyle. Having said all that, let's go over some operators that are great picks for a new team. Starting off, we have Shaw, a specialist operator that has the ability to push enemies. In some maps of Arknights, you can push or pull enemies into holes or off ledges, which is an instant kill. We can use Shaw to do just that. Shaw is able to be placed on both ranged or melee tiles, and can also serve as a frontline unit should the situation call for it. Next is Melantha, a guard operator that boasts high health and attack while also being relatively cheap to deploy. In certain cases, we'll want to play aggressively and assassinate specific targets before they can wreak havoc on our defensive line. Melantha is a duelist, and having high HP allows her to withstand attacks for long enough to assassinate her target. And once her job is done, we can simply have her retreat until she is needed again. Now let's talk about Rangers. Rangers is a 2-star sniper operator. Despite the low rarity, he has an incredible talent which allows him to deal 50% more damage against air targets, which in turn makes him useful from the early and mid stages of the game all the way to some endgame stages. Being a 2-star operator means that he is very cheap to deploy, but also limits his growth and makes him relatively weak when dealing with anything outside of air units. On the whole, he is an operator that is easy to level up and provides a lot of bang for the buck. On the subject of anti-air, we also have Cruz and Jessica. Both are able to deal with air and ground units with relative ease, and unlike Rangers, they have the ability to receive promotions to further increase their strength. The main difference between Cruz and Jessica lies in the difference of promotions. Jessica can be promoted up to E2 but cost more materials. Cruz can only be promoted once to E1 but has a lower cost of promotion. Finally, we have Fang, a Vanguard operator. Cheap to deploy and boasting relatively high defense, Fang's selling point is her talent, which almost halves her deployment cost in comparison to Vanguards of higher rarity. These few points may not seem like much, but in reality, every point counts when we're trying to set up quickly. A quick side note. We want to make sure we have at least 2 3-star operators in the team, as the game completely refunds the cost of leveling them up via mission board, making it basically free. To wrap this all up, 2 points about leveling the team. Generally speaking, we want our operators leveled evenly rather than have one certain operator outpacing the others. It is crucial to remember that our operators function as a team. Damage dealers can't deal damage if they're low level. Defenders cannot hold the line if medics are weak, and we might not even get past the first wave if vanguards are falling left and right. Another topic is, how far should I level up to? Answers will vary depending on player and playstyle, but my personal recommendation is to get an operator to E1 level 30. Doing so allows you to actually get a feel of how they operate and then decide whether or not you want to continue using them. That is it for Doctor's Guide Team Building. I hope this guide was helpful to new players and laid out the foundations of team building without sounding too technical. If you have any questions or wish to offer suggestions about the topic, please leave a comment below. Until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.